I feel like y'all are still thinking. It's so quiet in the room. Yeah, how was that? Big round of applause for Mr. Dan Nicholas. It was amazing. So yesterday, those of you that weren't here, you missed an amazing day, by the way. And we are going to bring a little bit more of that back to you today from yesterday. I talked about politics, how I despise them. I love Denise Gitsham. She is amazing. She is humble. She is kind. She is sweet. She is down to earth. And if you were here yesterday and you got to hear her, you would see that. She's so true. She's so real. And she's an amazing Christian woman. So we are here
to welcome back to the stage Denise Grace.
I don't do the most, but I do a lot.
My walk-on song. Thank you.
No,
I wondered where this was yesterday when I came on.
I shoot a shot.
Oh wait,
I'm coming in hot.
Yeah, you guys know this song, right? It wouldn't be okay. So yes, I'm a fake Latina. If you guys were here yesterday, you would understand. But my nickname in high school was Daniqua. So hip hop and rap were my thing. Half Chinese, half white, fake Latina, Daniqua. Go figure. Only God, right? Thank you again for the fabulous introduction, ladies. Sometimes when you say those things, I look around, I'm like, who are they talking about? My friends are here to keep me honest. So it's good to be back with some of y'all again and some of you for the first time. I don't know if you guys listened to Coach Diane yesterday, but I woke up this morning, and if you guys didn't do it, you should start. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time ever without being told to, because yesterday was the first time I was ever told to, I actually looked in the mirror and I said, I love you, Denise. And I was like, wow, that sounds so weird. I'm going to do it again. And I actually feel way better about it today. So thank you, Coach Diane. I'm going to start doing it. I made my husband do it too. He felt so awkward. This morning, we're going to talk about something we all need to be reminded of from time to time. It's about fighting your fight. You know, I'm in politics, so fighting is a thing. And I'm kind of an expert. But the reason I'm going to talk about fighting our fight today is so we can overcome obstacles and occupy our promised land. I'm in a big Joshua kick lately, so it's going to be a lot of OT going on today. But first, I wanted to share something I came across when I probably should have been asleep in bed. Maybe you guys can relate. Instagram. Look at his eyes.
It's mine. Oh my goodness.
That's me.
Oh, wow.
Oh my gosh. That was probably me at many phases in my life. I still do that. I just love that video because it so accurately represents our unapologetic desire for more, right? We all want more. We want more impact. We want more purpose. We want more influence. And we want more territory. We literally all were just born to want all that God has in store for us. And we're here today because we need to know that not only do we want what God has promised us, He actually wants to give it to us. Sometimes that's hard to remember, right? Because we just think, oh, we want that so bad, but God created your desires and He wants to give them to you. And so you guys should know that God is a multiplication God. He's an addition God. He's a God of expansion. He's not a God that divides or subtracts or contracts. If you want proof of that, just look at the first chapter of the first verse of the first chapter of the first book of the Bible. I need some of that coffee, Lisa. In Genesis 1:28, God issues his first ever cultural mandate, telling Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth and subdue it. And I love the Message version as well, so I threw it in. Take charge. Take dominion over every living thing. So this is obviously a blessing, right? But some people, some of us, we fail to recognize that it's also a commandment. God is voluntelling us. You've heard of that, right? That's what I do to my husband all the time, honey. I'm voluntelling you what to do. To cultivate all the potential of creation, which is totally normal and fully aligned with who we were created to be. God wants you to have more influence. Dan just told you why. Because he knows you're going to use it to glorify him. He wants you to have more resources because he knows you're going to bless others with them. He wants you to have more relationships, strategic relationships, because he knows you're going to use them to advance his kingdom. And he really, really wants you to step into your promised land because he knows that you're going to steward it for his glory. In fact, God not only wants you to step into your promised land, he commands you to do it. But until we realize that it's a commandment, way more than a mere blessing or just a suggestion, we're going to risk falling short of the more that God has created for us. Because he didn't bring us this far in life just to leave us out in the wilderness. And what he doesn't promise us, though, and this is something we always forget, is he doesn't promise us immunity from trials, obstacles, and opposition. And when they come, we can feel so overwhelmed that many of us just want to throw in the towel. Look, I'm a fighter by nature. I told you guys, I'm in politics. But if you don't believe me, just ask my husband. I love to fight. But even I feel like giving up sometimes, especially when the fight isn't one of my own choosing. So I'm here to encourage both you and me that we have to find our fight, overcome obstacles, and occupy our promised land. Are you guys in? Yeah. Let's start with the Israelites. It's a big, heavy Old Testament today. Israelites in the promised land. It was an actual geographic location that God was very specific about and described in great detail. It's the land that God promised his chosen people that they would inherit and occupy. Because, it's not enough just to go in. You actually have to occupy. But the promised land, it wasn't some glorious Garden of Eden. It wasn't where Adam and Eve just popped into and there was just sitting there empty, waiting to be occupied. In fact, it was anything but that. It was full of milk and honey, but it was also full of giants, y'all. There were kings and there were armies, and all of them were really keen on keeping that land for themselves. I mean, they had no idea what God had in store for the Israelites. All they knew was some ragtag group of people that used to be slaves and were dwelling in the desert were coming out of left field trying to take what they'd built. And the Israelites pretty much agreed with them. They knew they weren't battle-tested or ready, no matter how many times God called them mighty men of valor. In fact, I'm sure every time he said those words, they were looking around behind their shoulders and wondering, who's he talking to? So when God told the Israelites to occupy their promised land, he also had to tell them to be very strong and courageous multiple times. Because even though they'd had a few military successes here and there, they'd been wandering in the desert for the past 4 decades after 4 centuries of being slaves. To help them find their courage, God gave their leader, Joshua, this very specific promise. He said, "Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given you." Now, if you read that again, slowly, doesn't that sound really weird? It's just a strange way to put together a sentence. It's a future statement made in the past. Every place your foot will tread, that's future tense. Every place your foot will tread, right? But then he says, I have given you. That's a past tense statement, indicating that it is already settled and done, even though they hadn't even started yet. See, God knew that they needed an extra dose of courage. So he had to promise them a victorious outcome before they took a single step into the promised land. But as you and I know from our life's experiences, believing God is one thing, but actually acting on that belief, that's a totally different thing. Because things get real super quick when you're about to step into battle. You guys, stepping towards something you desire is always pretty easy. Anyone can do that, and most people do, right? We step towards clothes that we want to buy. We step towards things that we love and people. But stepping into what you want, that's like a whole other deal. Just ask any guy who's asked a girl out. There's a couple guys in here. When a guy likes a girl, especially one that has a bunch of suitors, he can step towards her and he can get pretty close. He can kind of stay in the friend zone and remain pretty safe as long as he kind of stays there. But the minute he decides to take action, the minute he finally decides to make his move, he's going to have to fight all the other guys that are lining up trying to get her attention. You see, the true test of our faith comes when we actually have to risk something. We have to fight for something. We have to overcome something, which means we have to act. To be honest, this feels a little counterintuitive to me. My human logic goes like this. If God wants me to have something, why doesn't he just give it to me? Am I like the only person in this room that feels like God should Amazon Prime his promises to us? Like, if he really wants us to have him, then why doesn't he just make it way easier? Because I may be a fighter, but I'm also kind of lazy, and I'm always looking for the path of least resistance. And the downside of being this way is that when the going gets tough, I tend to get going just in the opposite direction. My way of justifying this is often, you guys probably tell me I'm not alone on this. My way of justifying this is by questioning whether I actually heard God in the first place, if I heard him right, or is this just a bad burrito? And that sounds like a wise thing to do, right? I mean, it's smart to make sure it wasn't just a bad burrito. But wimpiness often masquerades as wisdom, and God sees right through it when it's just a delay tactic, or an excuse for disobedience. Because once your mission is confirmed by God, you've been voluntold, just like my husband's been voluntold, just like the Israelites were voluntold, to take dominion over your promised land. And when that happens, y'all better buckle up, because you're about to step into the fight of your life. Now, I've been told that I scare people a little. I'm a little too real, but I'd rather mentally prepare you for worst case scenario and have you end up being pleasantly surprised than prepare y'all for the best and have you wondering what just happened. So here's what you need to brace yourself for. The devil will do everything in his power to distract and discourage you on your way to your promised land. I mean, his only mission in this world is to steal, kill, and destroy. So obviously he's coming after you the minute you decide to go after more. He'll do everything he can do to make you quit by reminding you of your past disappointments. Tell me if any of these sound familiar. That promotion you prayed for, went to someone else. That child you were holding out hope for keeps making all the wrong decisions. Or that healing you were expecting, well, the doctor comes back with a pretty bad report. When we're believing for God's promises, the opposite of what we expect to happen always happens first. I mean, consider the cross. Jesus being crucified wasn't on my bingo card for how we get our victory over death. But the process that we go through of overcoming obstacles as we advance, that's what's used by God to build our character so that we can ultimately sustain the victories that we claim. To be clear, nobody I know loves a good character building session. It's usually a byproduct of some of the worst times in our lives. But if you want to step into more, you must develop the character and the resilience and the strength that God requires all of us in order to steward that more well. You see, we all love hearing and dreaming about and thinking about God's promises for our lives, but we don't always love the process. I don't love the process that's required to actually possess them. And the Israelites' process was particularly long and painful. When they finally stepped in the land that God had promised them, they were orphans by design. The leaders who'd taken them out of Egypt were dead, along with all of their parents and grandparents. God had waited for the last of that enslaved generation to die off because God wanted to father them himself. He had to retrain their minds and how to think victoriously like warriors instead of slaves. Because that previous generation, they had their opportunity to enter the promised land, but they blew it. They disobeyed God and got stuck in the wilderness because they didn't have the will, the character, the courage, or the faith to fight for what was rightfully theirs. God didn't want Joshua's generation to fall into that same trap. So he had to train them to think differently than their small-minded predecessors. Like me, at least some of them must have wondered, God, why didn't you just drop that promised land in my lap? But God had seen what the prior generation did when he simply handed them things and he didn't make them fight for them. Remember, God had miraculously delivered the Israelites out of Egypt. He fed them with manna and quail, and it was straight up DoorDash, right? He just gave it to them. It was just there when they woke up. They didn't have to lift a single finger or do a lick of work to survive. So when he told them to do something for themselves, to fight, they were like, what? We have to do something for this? No thanks. Even worse, some of them said, take us back to Egypt. We had cucumbers and watermelon, and they forgot that they were slaves. It kind of sounded like they preferred being enslaved to finding their internal fortitude to fight. Joshua and Caleb watched in dismay as their fellow countrymen delayed their promised land for 40 more years. I can't imagine how frustrated they were. So when they got their chance to advance, they were ready for a fight. And boy, gosh, y'all, was it a fight. It wasn't one fight. It wasn't two fights. It was 31 fights. It took Joshua 31 battles to defeat 31 enemies, 31 obstacles, 31 moments when he could have given up, tapped out like his predecessors, and said, let's just stay here instead. But under Joshua's leadership, the Israelites kept fighting out of conviction and pure obedience to God. Because like us, they wanted more too. More than just a taste of the promise. More than just that little sliver of land. More than just a few victories. Now Joshua, like us, he wanted it all. See, Joshua understood what his predecessors did not. That God's promise requires our participation. Sometimes that looks like fighting, but most of the time, it looks like good old-fashioned work. You know, that's something my parents, they were immigrants, they just assumed that you had to work when they came to America. They weren't afraid of rolling up their sleeves to get the more that they came looking for. Coming to America at my parents' ages meant taking nothing for granted. My dad moved from Canada at the start of high school to the literal hood of East Orange, New Jersey. He was fourth in a working class family of 5 who basically had to raise themselves. Any moment that he wasn't trying to play hockey, which was usually at like 3 in the morning, he always said, he also had to walk uphill back and forth from school. He said he was cutting lawns. He said he was taking on newspaper routes and doing whatever he had to make ends meet. My mom moved from Taiwan to San Francisco when she was 29 years old. She spoke very little English. Her college degree didn't count in America, so she had to start all over in community college and relearn everything she'd learned before while learning English. In Taiwan, she'd been a glamorous TV star, but in America, she was a waitress. So coming to America wasn't easy for them, but they had to work hard, and they were willing to get there more. In fact, their stories are precisely what the American dream is made of. They were living embodiments of St. Augustine's quote, "Pray as though everything depended on God, and work as though everything depended on you." But even hard work, that won't get you anywhere if you're not willing to do things God's way. Take, for example, the Israelites' first battle, the Battle of Jericho. You know the one you sing that song about. Did you guys sing, Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down? Yeah. I sing on the side. The Sunday school song makes it sound so easy, like no big deal. They just looked at those walls and they came a-tumbling down. But that's not what happened. They fell because they did exactly what God called them to do. And believe me, this was no conventional battle. God told them to march around those city walls 6 times in complete silence, which, listen, y'all, I would have been disqualified. I would have lost that battle immediately. 6 times, 6 days in silence. No way, not happening. Then on day 7, he told them to blow some trumpets and give a big shout. And guess what? The walls came a-tumbling down. Like I said, it's an unconventional battle plan, and it's never been replicated since. But the reason they obeyed is because of what happened the night before the battle. Joshua had an encounter with a messenger of the Lord, and he had to surrender his battle plans to God's. In other words, he decided in advance before he went into battle that he was going to do whatever God said, even if doing so made 0 sense. I'm sure the Israelites thought he was crazy telling them to march around silently, but Joshua didn't care. He'd committed to not only participating in God's plan, but to doing things God's way. You see, some of us, we get stuck in the wilderness, not because we're not willing to do what God tells us to do. Some of us, we get stuck because we're not willing to do things God's way. But promised lands, they can't be accessed through logic or laziness. Some of them can only ever be accessed through our participation and our obedience. Now, I know I've been tough on the Israelites today. Hindsight is 2020, especially thousands of years later. And I'm as good at Monday morning quarterbacking as I am at backseat driving. Just ask my husband, but watch how you answer that. There is one area where we could truly learn a thing or two from them. And that is unlike many of us today, the Israelites actually expected opposition as they advanced. Remember, Joshua and Caleb were 2 of the 12 spies who scoped out the land, and so they'd seen the giants living there. They knew what to expect. They knew there was serious opposition to overcome. Whereas we, here in America, modern day people, we have it so easy that we rarely even expect obstacles, and when we see them, we are just overwhelmed. A recent Gallup poll showed that less than 50% of Americans tend to think that they're thriving, even though we rank amongst the wealthiest people in the world. Only 35% of millennials think that working hard is an important factor to success, and most believe that it's the system that's rigged against them. Only 53% still believe that the American dream is even possible. They should talk to my parents. And 7 in 10 Americans no longer believe that you can overcome any obstacle with hard work. All of their perceptions may be partially true, and we've seen how Wall Street and Capitol Hill have given us reasons to doubt that the system is equal or fair. But as Christians, oh no, we're not subject to any of the systems of this world. So we should never buy into that defeatist thinking about our futures, because we know that if God is for us, nothing can stand against us. In other words, the obstacles, they may be real, but they just have nothing that can keep us from our destinies. Joshua understood this principle better than most, that when God calls us to advance, we should expect opposition. He didn't interpret the evidence of opposition or obstacles as being out of God's will, like so many of us do. He interpreted them as being right in the center of God's will. And I'm preaching to myself because I have been so guilty of forgetting this truth. As a political commentator on TV, I try to say things that are spiritually principled as often as I can. But oftentimes, when I am most on point with God, I am the least politically popular person. I get so much pushback for the things I say, and I've gotten a lot of death threats too from viewers on both sides of the aisle. When I was new at this gig, I thought to myself, I don't think I'm cut out for this. I'm like a 3 on the Enneagram, y'all. Like, I am a people pleaser. I like being liked. And when people give me death threats, it scares me. But I knew that being on TV and talking about politics was my promised land. It took me almost 46 years to get on TV. That's the age when most women in media retire. That's how long it took me to get my first news contract. And almost immediately, I swear, the day that I started on my first day in the contract, criticism came at me that had never existed before. You know, once you sign that dotted line, it's very different from all the interviewing parts where it's just kind of fun. I had criticism in my ear while I was on TV from the producers. I had criticism when I got off TV from my friends, and I got criticism nonstop from my viewers thanks to Instagram. I was told that I was too weak or too strong, too soft or too opinionated, too centrist, too partisan, basically too little and too much all at the same time. And all of that opposition made me want to quit. I just wanted to give up right as I stepped literally into my promised land. I was not prepared, y'all, for the opposition, but I should have expected it. Nevertheless, I stuck with it. I cried so much, asked my husband. And even when it was hard, even when I wanted to quit, I kept going. And I'm happy to report that I'm now in my 3rd year of doing this, and I really feel God's pleasure in it. I still want to quit at times. But I've had to learn to expect and interpret opposition as a sign that I'm actually doing something right. Because in case you haven't noticed, politics and the media aren't exactly where Christ reigns supreme. It's a territory that culture dominates, and Jesus has called me to redeem. So of course there's going to be opposition, y'all. I get that now. But I wish I would have been prepared for it or had someone up on stage telling me to. You're welcome. So now that we're mentally prepared for a fight, we've got to make sure that we're dressed appropriately for battle. And you guys really know how much I love to shop, so talking about this gives me great joy. When I go into battle, and for me that's stepping on stage or getting in front of a TV camera, I look just like I do now. All it takes to go from homeless to TV ready for me is a pair of false eyelashes, some hairspray and lipstick, a blazer and heels, and I'm good to go. It takes me about 7 minutes. I think that's my record, to go literally homeless to this. But when we're fighting, When we're fighting, there's a lot more to be dressed for battle than just what we wear on the outside. When we're fighting for our promised land, we're not just fighting against flesh and blood. We're fighting against principalities and spiritual forces. That's why scripture tells us to put the full armor of God on, which honestly, this sounds like a really well accessorized outfit to me. And Lisa's going to talk about this a little more, so I won't go into depth, but there's the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness. I've never worn a breastplate, to be clear, other than in spiritual terms. A shield of faith, a helmet of salvation. Hat hair is not my thing, but I'll do it. Sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And most importantly, feated with the gospel of peace, because every woman knows there's no such thing as a good outfit without a perfect pair of shoes. If you guys don't know about these, listen to Lisa. She'll go into them in depth, but read Ephesians 6. God will tell you all about them and why they're important. But I will tell you that every accessory that's referenced on this list, it carries heavy spiritual significance. It either protects you from opposition or it helps you advance in enemy territory. And every part of it is essential for your battle for more. Now, so far, we've covered most of the things I would consider to be external: giants, armor, our personal participation in the fight. So let's switch gears for a moment and talk about something that's equally, if not more important: overcoming internal obstacles that keep us in the wilderness. Listen, we can prepare all we want to fight the obstacles that exist outside of us, but what holds us back on the inside is ultimately what dooms us to fail. Just back to the Israelites for a hot second. I feel like they're my emotional punching bag today, and Lord, I'm sorry. But as discussed, the Israelites were given not one, but 2 chances at getting in the promised land. The first one came about a year after God had delivered them from slavery. And in that year, they'd look back all the time and complain and look back with rose-colored glasses on the centuries they'd spent in Egypt. They were yearning for the good old days and somehow forgot that they had actually been in chains. A year in the wilderness wasn't nearly enough to get them out of their deeply enslaved mindset. They had identity issues, y'all. They had a scarcity spirit, and they had small-minded beliefs. They reminded me of this experiment. Maybe you guys read about this, where there's a scientist, and he put a bunch of fleas in a plastic container and put a lid on how high they could jump. And so the fleas started jumping. They got used to kind of jumping that high. But even after they took that lid off, basically the fleas had been trained to not jump any higher than the lid. And so when they took that off, the fleas kind of just stayed there. They never went as high as they could before because they no longer believed that jumping that high was even possible. So yeah, that's kind of crazy, right? That's basically what Moses was dealing with in the prequel to the Promised Land. A bunch of former slaves who stayed enslaved in their minds, even though they were totally free to live their best lives in centuries. And in a way, I get it. When you've been enslaved as long as they had been, you forget how to dream big. In fact, you don't even think it's possible. And that was true of their leader too. Listen, Moses had self-limiting beliefs. I know that he's like a hero in the faith, but just look at what he said when he first commissioned those spies to scope out the promised land. I'd never seen this before until I was prepping for this. Read this with me. This is Moses' words as he was sending the spies out. See what the land is like and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or is it bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they walled, unwalled, or fortified? How's the soil? Is it fertile or is it poor? You guys, Moses was asking these questions, and as he asked them, the way he asked them actually planted seeds of doubts in those spies' minds. Before they even left, he planted doubts about the quality of the land, which God had already described to him as fertile and verdant. He had He had planted doubts about their ability to overcome people living in those areas where God had already said they would defeat them. And he planted doubts about their ability to overcome fortified cities, which God had already assured that were theirs for the taking. Moses had a lot of strengths, but he had a self-limited, slave-infested mindset. And he passed that mindset on to his spies and everybody else under his care. So is it really surprising that 10 of them came back and struck fear into the hearts of the people? I mean, they answered every question he set them up with in the negative. That got God real mad at them, like real mad. So much so that he sent them back in the wilderness for 40 long years, and he waited for that enslaved mindset generation to die, including Moses. The last thing he wanted his people to bring into the promised land was that lame mindset. Because the greatest threats to our promised lands are not the giants in front of us. It's the mindsets within us. The Israelites had done a lot of stupid things in the desert. They worshiped a golden calf, if you'll remember. But God was willing to overlook all of it, even the idol worship, and still give them their inheritance. What he wasn't willing to overlook, y'all, was their pathetic and limited mindsets and their corresponding lack of faith, which actually led to all-out disobedience. Remember what we talked about yesterday regarding the grasshopper mentality, when the naysaying spies came back and said, "We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes and also in the giants"? You see, the Israelites didn't miss out on their promised land because the giants kept them out. They missed out on their promised land because of how they saw themselves. There's a lesson in this story for all of us. Some of you are standing at the edge of your calling right now, and you feel like a fraud. I feel like a fraud sometimes. You feel unqualified. I feel you. You feel overwhelmed, and you feel like you're not enough. You feel like a grasshopper, whether you're willing to admit it or not. And I'm telling you what I've had to remind myself of, that our mindsets are going to keep us from getting the more that we desire in life. But here's a public service announcement that you can take to the bank in cash. God doesn't call the qualified, y'all. He qualifies the called. I mean, I have to say that all the time to myself. He doesn't consult your resume before recruiting you. He doesn't ask you if you feel ready or check your qualifications. He simply asks if you're willing and gives you everything you need to succeed, but only after you say yes to him. For some of us today, God is trying to upgrade your identities, but we keep playing old narratives. There's just a broken record in our minds saying, "I'm just simply not enough." But that isn't God saying those things to you. That's you disqualifying yourself. Because you can't fight like a warrior if you still think you're a grasshopper. And none of us were created to be grasshoppers. We were all created to be warriors. We may not always feel that way, but God doesn't call us based on how we feel. Our calling is not dependent on where we are in our cycle and our current mindset. Ladies, you're never going to step a foot into your promised land until you choose to believe what God says about you. Because you don't become a warrior after you get brave. You become brave after you accept your calling as a warrior. But even the greatest warriors, they make mistakes along the way. Right after they won in Jericho, they learned a really hard lesson about compromise and sin. In the battle for a town that I can only call AI, because I don't know how else to describe it. It's AI is how you spell it. I just call it AI. It was a tiny little town that the Israelites should have won, and they suffered a humiliating defeat. They totally lost their confidence. And it was all because of the hidden sin of one guy, This guy, Achan, he totally disobeyed God. He grabbed a bunch of stuff when the walls of Jericho came tumbling down, and he hid them in his tent, which totally disobeyed God's commandment to destroy everything and take nothing for themselves. And that decision to sin affected the whole nation. Not only did it cause them to lose the battle, it caused their hearts to melt with fear. They were terrified that God had left them because they lost this battle to this little nothing town of Ai. So when he was finally outed, this Achan guy, they had OT, some Old Testament revenge. They stoned him and his family to death. They destroyed what he'd taken. They burned everything with fire, and then they piled stones on top of that, which I'll admit, that seems a little extreme to me. But the Israelites were not playing with sin. They refused to have any compromise come between them and their promised land. And God was pleased by their quick resolution. So as soon as he was dealt with, they won that battle when they went back in with the Lord. The moral of this story is that we cannot step into God's promise while holding on what he's told us to release. Our human nature wants victory, but without surrendering anything to God. We want breakthrough, but we want to have it without embracing his holiness. The problem is partial obedience still counts as full disobedience to God. And it might be the only thing that's keeping you from your promised land. Too often we think that we need new strategies, when honestly, all we really need are clean hands and a pure heart before the Lord. I know we've covered a lot today. We've covered sin, limiting mindsets, giants, shopping, body armor. Body armor. But the biggest takeaway above all else is that we have to stay in the fight, no matter how long it takes or how many external or internal obstacles we have to overcome. Remember, Joshua fought 31 battles. It's not a moment, my friends. That's a freaking marathon. And I know that there are women here in the audience who are tired. I'm tired. I'm tired. There was a big train that came through Midland today. It woke me up at 4 a.m. I'm tired. And we've all been fighting for our families, our careers, our health, our callings, and we're fighting for our more. And we often find ourselves wondering, is it even worth it? Does that promised land even exist? Can I quit yet? Or will I just make it to tomorrow? Low standards. I just want to make it to tomorrow. I get that. I've been there. I'm not there right now, but I've been there. When my first marriage ended, I'd really lost everything that mattered to me. My house, my job, a baby, my car, and almost my parents too. And I remember not really feeling suicidal per se, but I just remembered I was kind of ambivalent as to whether or not God kept me around anymore. I could barely get out of bed each day, much less dream about having more. More felt like a luxury. I was just trying to get by. But I have some friends sitting right there. They would not let me stay there. They believed that God was setting me up for more. In fact, one of my best friends, when I was in the worst place in my life, she came by and gave me a sign, and it was kind of annoying. It said, "The best is yet to come," and it had this big, huge exclamation point on it. I half-heartedly thanked her because that's the polite thing to do instead of shoving it back in her face. And I stuck it on my dresser because even though I didn't believe it, I really wanted to. Every day I'd see it. I'd read it. I would prophesy it over my pathetic, lonely life. The best is yet to come. I would read it out loud. I just didn't have any of the enthusiasm from the exclamation point. And every day for 6 long months, I did my part. Barely, but I did my part. I showed up. I did what he put before me to do. I cared for my parents, and I fought to survive. No matter how much I wanted to quit, my faithful friends just wouldn't let me. God used them to help me stay in the fight. But I had to choose for myself to stay. And look at how far God has brought me today. 5 short years later. It's incredible. Somebody asked me the other day, they're like, are you sure that was 2021 when all that stuff happened? I'm like, yeah, that was 2021, 5 years ago. And now I'm thriving in my career. I'm so happily remarried to the best man I know who's working this screen thing for me right now, who made these slides, by the way. I'm actually living in my more era. It's incredible. I'm a living testimony of how God brought beauty out of a disastrous pile of ashes. And you can be too. But only, ladies, if you're willing to find your fight. So I'm just going to ask you for a second. What have you stopped fighting for? Where have you settled when God has called you to conquer? Where have you compromised or cut corners? And how have you disqualified yourself? These are hard questions. You have to be really honest when you grapple with them. But they're questions that you absolutely have to come to terms with if you still want more. Because your promised land, ladies, I'm living testimony of it. Your promised land, it's real. And it's sitting there waiting for you to come and take it. God hasn't changed his mind. And you are never going to be satisfied until it's fully yours. So just take a breath and think about what you've heard. This is not just some random message. You're not here by accident. This is a moment because you don't need any more information. I gave you way too much today. I'm sorry about that. It's early. But you do need to make a decision. There are women in this room who know exactly when and where and why you stopped fighting. That thing you've been avoiding, that lie you've been believing, the obedience that you've been delaying. And today God is saying, enough. It's time. So start by naming your battle. Where is your promised land? Where's the destination you're standing right on the border of, but not stepping into? Is it your calling? Is it using your voice? Is it a healing that you're hoping for? Is it your leadership role? Or is it letting go of something that God has called you repeatedly to release? If you're here today and you know God is calling you to find your fight again, I want you to do me a favor. Do yourself a favor. I want you to stand to your feet. I want you to stand to your feet, not because anyone else is standing, but because you've decided to make a decision. This is a line in the sand moment where you say to yourself and to God, I will not stay where I've been for 1 second longer. So repeat it after me, ladies. I will not stay where I've been for 1 second longer. I'm so proud of you. Look at this room. This is what it looks like when women decide, I'm not disqualified. It's not too late. I am not too broken. I am called, I am chosen, I am equipped. That's what you guys are. And I am ready to fight. Now keep standing and repeat this after me. Or just read it for yourself with me. I will not shrink back. I will not believe the lie I will obey even when it's hard. I will confront what stands in my way. And I will fight for what God has promised me. So let's stay standing and let me close this in prayer because I want to seal this decision right now. God, you see every woman who's standing. Right now, we break agreement with every lie that they have come to believe. Every not enough,